And welcome to the seventh episode of the Culture Gym podcast. You're listening to Gareth Shackleton and my co-host, Carly Richards. Morning, Carly. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Gareth. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, very well indeed. How's your week
Good.
been?
My week's been really good, actually. I've had a great work week, great family week. So I think the theme for this week has very much been about kind of growth development. So I've had several great meetings about lots of different projects that I've been doing with colleagues and clients, and I was talking to someone about growing my property portfolio. I was talking to someone about growing the new project that I'm working on for children. I was also, yesterday, out of the blue, I had a great meeting yesterday morning, even though it was supposed to be a day off. I had a great meeting yesterday morning where somebody actually wanted to talk to me about a new proposal and a potential long-term kind of project to work with them on, which is just really exciting. So yeah, that was good. And then yesterday after my meeting, we had the rest of the day off as a family. We went to Alnwick Castle, which is, yeah, it was brilliant. So and it wasn't too busy because they're only allowing a certain amount of people in, so the car park was great. We got parked straight away. There was loads of space for the kids to run around and not have to worry about bumping into people. And they didn't really have anything inside open, but it was a great day weather-wise, so we were happy to just be outside all the time. So yeah, I've had
has some benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've had a brilliant week. What about you?
Very good. Yeah, good. Yeah, the weather's been pretty good on and off, so a bit of time out and about, and it's been nice getting some walks in the evenings, and it's good to get that exercise. It's interesting at the moment from a business point of view. There seems to be a lot of optimism about. It's that green shoots kind of feeling, because everybody's looking at scaling up their businesses and either to get back to where they were, or to take advantage of some amazing opportunity that the lockdown or the pandemic or the coming back out of lockdown has offered them. So yeah, there seems to be quite a lot of optimism, which is great, and it's great to tap into that and to be working with clients in that kind of growth phase that's been thrust upon them after a period of I don't know, hibernation or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely get that vibe as well. There's a lot of, where do we go from here? And I'm going through that as well. I'm kind of going through this whole, me and my team, we're having discussions around where do we go from here and what do we do? And yeah, I had great chats with the business partner / mentor this week about that. So it's been, yeah, I think everyone's feeling that vibe at the minute, aren't they?
Yeah. Certainly people that I'm coming across, I'm sure there are people that aren't.
Yes.
Depending on their situations, maybe elements of the tourism industry where they're struggling to get up to capacity, and so that's affecting their profitability. Not everybody, there are some businesses that are doing okay at the moment. So in that sector. But yes. Yeah, generally speaking, I think it's that release, isn't it? We've all been released from lockdown, and we're all going a little bit
to a certain extent. We're still not quite there yet, and I mean, if anyone's listening in the kind of Manchester northwest area, then or Aberdeen now.
Well, that's right. Yeah, sadly,
it's quite so lucky as us.
You still need to. There's no room for complacency, is there? You still need to be cautious, and whether that's fear of the virus or whether it's more to do with fear of a second lockdown that the government may enforce upon us, whether that's local or national. We all need still to be cautious, and from my perspective, it's more about the fear of being locked down again and the impact that has economically than it is on the fear of the virus itself. It's just a natural phenomenon that we have to learn to live with, in my opinion.
Well, I haven't looked into the virus at all. I don't really know enough about it to have that discussion.
Well, maybe we shouldn't go there. It's not relevant.
No, I don't think so. I'm kind of just living in, well, I'll do what we're supposed to do, and I'm not going to watch the news because I'm kind of maintaining my own well-being.
Yeah.
That way, which actually brings us on. I'm really good at tying that knot together, because that brings us on very nicely to this week's topic, which is well-being. So today we're going to talk about well-being, a culture that cares. How do we create a culture that cares? So do you want to start us off with that, Gareth?
Well, well, maybe I'll start it by just getting to the root of what I consider there is, there's a lot of well-being initiatives put in place in businesses, in organizations, not just businesses. Initiatives like healthcare plans, mental health awareness training, perhaps, even gym memberships or on-site gyms in bigger organizations, and all of those are considered as being well-being initiatives. But I find it interesting that actually the things that impact on well-being at work are probably things that are not considered well-being. It's things like good communication, because that affects people's stress levels. It's about work demands and workload, because that affects people's stress levels. It's about having control over your job, empowerment, autonomy. And these are the things that are perhaps not considered well-being related, but absolutely are. And that, when we talk about creating a well-being culture, these are the things that I think we need to be considering. These perhaps more operational aspects of the business and the organization, about how they're handled, managed, rather than what might be called well-being initiatives. So I guess maybe I'm being a little bit too critical there, but that's a perspective that I might launch in with.
I think well-being initiatives, they have their place, but I think what's important right now, certainly when we're going through a crisis, is to have the basics all, ticked off, covered completely. And I think if you're not doing them, then anything you chuck at an employee, for example, that has a well-being initiative focus, it's going to be deemed as inauthentic. They're just chucking money at us here. They don't really care. For example, if you're treating an employee badly, yet you offer them a gym membership, or you offer them, I don't know, some sort of counselling support or coaching or anything that it may be, the perception will likely be, this is great, but you don't really care. You're just doing, like, as a leader, as an organization, the values, they're not being followed through on. You don't really care about us. You just want, you're just ticking the box to say, well, we've done this, we've covered this well-being thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think you tend to make things worse then as well in an organization.
Exactly.
Because you create, the employee is likely to take advantage of the perk that you're offering, but at the same time treat it with cynicism, which makes things worse from a communication point of view, from a employee relations point of view, and from a health and well-being point of view as well. Cynicism is not a healthy state of mind, as I'm sure you can offer a psychological point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not. And once those thoughts and those feelings are kind of inbred in our minds, or perceptions of something or someone, that's why they talk, there's an awful lot of chat about first impressions. Once that is in there, particularly if it's been developed over time, as it perhaps would be in this case, it's really difficult to change that. So I think consistency is key, treating employees with respect, and Certainly, I think more recently in lockdown, I've had many conversations with lots of different people about how they're being treated from their employer, or how perhaps if it's a business colleague of mine who has their own business, perhaps it's about how their partner's being treated. And this perhaps is, I'm not generalizing, it's just perhaps a coincidence that the conversations I've been having tend to be, most of them tend to be with organizations that are sort of between 20 and 50 employees, who have no kind of structured communication systems in place. So they don't have an HR, an HR department. They don't have a communications department. So they feel like they've been forgotten about, because the communication has, with some companies, not all, because they've basically been told what to do. They have to log on between certain hours of the day. They know what they're doing. They get emails back and forward, but there's no one checking in to say, how are you doing? How is everything okay? What's going on at home? How are you managing to juggle homeschooling as well? What's your agenda for this week in your personal life? Do we need to make adjustments for that? And I think it's those little subtle human decent things to do. Just, you don't have to be their best friend as a leader, but you do have to consider what's going on for them. And I think it's those things that make a difference.
I agree. It's those operational things again, or it's the human interaction things, isn't it? It's business operations, but how people are interacting that really creates that sense of well-being, which is where it all comes from. And I think it's a really difficult thing in the size of businesses that you're talking about, those up to 50 employees, because the leaders in that kind of business often have their own operational jobs to do, whereas perhaps in a bigger organization, leadership is a massive part of the task. Actually caring for your people, sitting down and talking to them, is part of the job, and it's what you're paid for, and it's what you trained for. Whereas in the smaller businesses, up to 50 employees, again, generalizing, this isn't always the case, but maybe you've never had that kind of leadership training or leadership role models. Even if you've grown a business from being you to 50 people, you've always been the leader, and you perhaps don't have the role models about how good leadership could or should look like. That's not to say that there are universally poor leaders in those kinds of sizes of business. I know some fantastic leaders in
definitely
who really do care about their people and take time to talk and understand the stresses and pressures of people's lives.
They see it as a really important part.
But it is a challenge for that kind of size of business as well, that it's not the same level of training and mentorship that goes on always in those kinds of businesses.
Equally, I had a conversation yesterday, in fact, with someone who works in the communications team of a really large organization, who are going through some redundancies, well, all being made redundant at the minute. And so a real challenge for this individual, because she's having to kind of communicate on redundancies, knowing that she's going to be made redundant at some point. But it's interesting that now that that's sort of coming to an end, how people are feeling. And there'll be lots and lots of people who are being made redundant, lots of companies who are having to make their staff redundant, and that's going to hit hard for everybody involved. The leaders as well who are having to do that, that's going to hit hard. But I think what's important to try and not lose is that sense of human decency. She's been having a really tough week in terms of how she's been treated, because the stress levels are starting to heighten. It's real life. Everyone's going to feel a bit rubbish about the whole situation. So I think it's important to really try and dig deep and maintain that level of human decency. So we're not having people who are going through a really tough situation anyway, being made to feel like they're not cared about, they're not thought of, especially towards the end of that situation. So I think, it comes down to just basic, what's the right thing to do here? What's the decent thing to do? We should be checking in with our staff. We should be checking in with how they're feeling, how they're coping, what they're doing at home. Just on a general kind of way that you would if everyone was in the office right now as well.
Well, in an organisation that has a good culture around that, absolutely they would. When everybody's in the office, and that should be then propagated into the remote workers. It's if you haven't already got that culture, then it can, the times of crisis like this, as you've alluded to, when these kinds of well-being issues can really come to the front.
Yeah, exactly.
And, really show up the well-being weaknesses in your culture.
And I think if you're a leader who needs, structure and who has a set routine, then add something like this into your routine. Set aside an hour where you're picking up the phone once a week, a couple of times a week, for 5-10 minutes, just to check in with a few employees, depending on the size of your organization, of course. And obviously, depending on the size, then that could work with all the leaders. If they were all to do it for 5-10 members of staff, then I think that would work wonders. Or every other week.
Having the organisation so that you've almost got these groups of 7's being considered the right size number for for direct reports, and you're not having more than that, because you just can't understand a person's personality and needs and desires and abilities and of more than 7 people in that kind of depth. It doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to everybody else in your organisation. If you're the MD, CEO, try and get around everybody, but having that 7 direct reports, and then having that culture of spending the time with your direct reports, that spreads the culture of them spending their time with their direct reports. And then you've got these cells of 7 or 8 people that are looking after each other.
Bubbles.
Ah,
we could call them bubbles after this, now that we're all familiar with the term.
Right. That was always something in aero bars, not in companies.
So quite a straightforward one this week. Just do the right thing, I guess. But a really important one all the same.
Humanity, that's the key word for me in this that you've brought up. It's treating people as people and not just cogs in a wheel or parts of a machine or resources. That's the word that comes out of human resources, isn't it?
Yes.
Treat people as humans, not as resources.
Yes. Do you know, Gareth, honestly, that's kind of like my life's work. Just to educate the world of business and the world of work on how to treat people like people.
Yeah.
Is my life's work. I see that as really important stuff. Something we're not doing, weirdly, but
well,
really
and I think things are getting better, but there's still a lot of opportunity there.
There is, yes, there's a lot. So this week's question, we've talked about lots of different questions that we've been asked this week. So why don't you fire ahead with the one we've chosen?
Well, a question that's coming up from clients, because as we've said, green shoots and optimism, a number of clients are looking to hire. And, when you start to get into that hiring process, you're thinking about person specs and job descriptions. And so the question has kind of come up in various ways around, should we hire for cultural fit, and how do we do that? And that sounds like a very simplistic question and perhaps a very simplistic answer, but I think there's lots of depth in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different rabbit holes we could go off on with this one. But I think to keep it simple and straightforward, there's a concept, certainly in occupational psychology, called person-environmental fit, and it's basically the notion of, from an individual perspective, to get the best out of them. If we aren't working within an organization that fits with who we are, that fits with perhaps our values, how we like to work, if we're not working in an environment that allows for us to be our best selves, mm-hmm. quite simply, we're not going to be our best self.
Yeah.
So if we, and there's lots and lots of different studies around this, and there's lots and lots of different kind of concepts that have been studied, but that's it in its most straightforward form.
Yeah.
If we aren't working in a place that allows us to work to our best, then we're not gonna. So from an organizational perspective, then, if you hire a number of staff in your team that don't fit with your organization in terms of their values and how they like to work, and you don't adapt to suit them, then you're going to have a number of individuals in your team who aren't performing at their best, and we know from sort of group dynamics and group theories and things that can then infiltrate into the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. So before you know it, you could have a real kind of performance and well-being issue on your hands. So it's important that we get this right, but the interesting question is, how do we get this right?
Right.
Because the other aspect, the other extreme is, perhaps if we were to hire a group of people who were a very similar personality to each other, or very similar people to mm-hmm. each other, then we have a problem at the other end of the scale, in that we don't have any diversity.
That's right.
And we know that that's also a problem. Mm-hmm. So it's about getting that balance.
I agree, absolutely. And how do you do that? That becomes a question. So I think, the first question, should you hire for cultural fit? It's almost a throwaway yes, obviously, isn't it? Because
I think, to a certain extent.
So then the question is, how do you do that, and how do you then achieve this balance between cultural fit in terms of people have the same overall general values and beliefs, versus achieving that diversity so that you don't get the same answer from everybody, and you get that creativity that comes from diverse opinions and attitudes and beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it depends how you're going to answer this question. I think in general, yes, we should be looking to hire for a broader kind of contextual cultural fit, mm-hmm. Rather than this person has to think like this and this person must have these values. I think if we're being too strict with it, that's where the problems occur.
Yeah.
But then it also raises the question in terms of recruitment, or on questions around fairness, and so we have to, especially for recruitment, we have to be really careful that we're being fair in terms mm-hmm. of how we recruit people. Mm-hmm. Whilst I've done some research and things into recruitment, it's not my area of expertise. Perhaps we should consider getting someone who works in recruitment mm-hmm. on at some stage. But I think, so for example, you can do personality profiling. You shouldn't base your whole judgment on an individual's personality. That's unethical, and that would be wrong. But what you can use it for is to help shape your interview questions, for example. You can use it to, so if someone is, I don't know, perhaps they rank highly on agreeableness. Mm-hmm. You could give them a scenario and ask them a couple of questions about how they would tackle a situation with conflict, for example. And you would judge their response. You wouldn't judge where they ranked on agreeableness, mm-hmm. In the personality profiling. But I think this is a question that doesn't have, or these are questions that don't have definitive answers, other than, yeah, generally you should hire for cultural fitness.
Yeah, and I think it's about understanding your organization enough and going through that cultural analysis, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I was going to say very few businesses do it. I guess there are certain types or sizes of businesses that actually spend some time thinking about their culture and trying to analyze it. And there's always a danger with putting something like culture into pigeonholes. But understanding your culture at a basic level, to understand if someone's going to thrive in that environment, is really important. We don't have to have cultural fit on every parameter, on every dimension. We need to have cultural fit on some specific dimensions. If you've got a business culture which is incredibly dynamic and driven and goal oriented, and you know, whatever we have to do to get the job done kind of culture, which is perfectly fine, then you need to hire people who are going to fit with that. And hiring someone who's not competitive, who's laid back, who is perhaps more, I don't know, considered and what needs to spend time to get things done right. There's nothing wrong with that neither. They perhaps won't fit very easily within that culture.
Yeah. Depending on the job you're asking them to do, of course.
Well, that's true, but equally, you know, this is where it's about understanding the broad overview of your culture and what the overriding dimensions are in terms of personality fit or values fit, because it's not every dimension that we need to pay attention to. It's just a few, probably.
Sorry about that. If you heard me whispering, yeah, my son just appeared. It's quite early in the morning. He just appeared and it's like that classic. Did you remember? Was it last year on the news where that guy was being interviewed on the BBC News, and then his toddler just runs in, and the nanny runs in behind to grab the toddler and take him back out. It's kind of like that situation. I'm like, go. I'll come out in a minute.
The joys of home working.
Sorry about that. I know, this is it. Bless him.
Maybe just to conclude then, and to bring you up to speed about, or the point I was making was understanding your culture enough and in a few key dimensions around what really drives the way that things are done in your organization and what's important in terms of the way things are done in your organization. Culture is a very complex thing. You can analyze it in hundreds or thousands of dimensions, but actually what are the 3 or 4 or 5 that really drive the way that people operate there? That's going to be most important. And then look for diversity in the others. But, you know, what are the ones that are going to dictate how people thrive in your organization?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you definitely have to consider, so are people on board with what it is with your mission? Are people on board with what it is that your values of the company? I think that as long as people are kind of thinking in the same way as well.
Well, that's right, and that's what culture's about, isn't it? It's those unwritten rules about the ways people behave, and behaviour comes from their thoughts. So, do people think in the same way? They're going to behave in similar ways then. So, but in these few key dimensions that are important to you and your culture. It's probably a good time to wrap things up. It's getting busy in Richard's household, and the internet.
I'm getting interrupted a number of times here.
And the internet seems to be failing your side as well. So probably everybody's up and about and using the bandwidth.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, week 8 next week. I look forward to that.
Yep. Let's wrap things up. Have a good week, Carly. Have a good week, everybody. And look forward to talking more about culture and cultural workouts at the Culture Gym next week.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.